Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Ealing Road podcast. Bit of a different one today. Obviously, we're reacting to the big news that Thomas Frank is most likely on his way out of Brentford. There's been various reports over the last kind of 4 days, ever since Ange Postecoglou's sacking, that Thomas Frank was a leading contender. It's been given the Fabrizio Romano "here we go" this morning. Don't know how much you can read into that, but I think we all kind of know what's coming. So we decided that it's the right time to jump on the pod and talk about it. Craig, how you doing?
Yeah, well, we'll find out, I suppose, in the next couple of days, maybe even the next couple of hours, how we're really doing. But yeah, I mean, it could be a different trajectory to what people are predicting.
Callum?
I'm fine, he hasn't left yet, so there you go. Business as usual.
Dan, how are we?
It's obviously very sad. I mean, he's done so much for us. I think in our lifetime, definitely, obviously the best manager we've ever seen, and he's been at Brentford for quite a long time now. So it'll be a weird feeling to be without him. But yeah, I agree that we don't know what way it's going to go yet, and it'll be a very interesting summer before the season starts to see what happens.
Yeah, I was looking forward to a nice break over the summer, but I think we're probably going to be quite active now. But just before we get going, remember to drop a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. I thought the way we'd kind of structure the pod today is we'll kind of do some initial reaction. We'll look back at Thomas Frank's time at Brentford. We'll kind of analyse how well or how poorly we'll think he'll do at Spurs. There's been a lot of rumours linking our players to him, most namely Brian Mbumo and Nathan Collins. And we'll also talk about the succession plan, which I think most people want to hear about towards the end, in terms of who replaces Thomas Frank. But I'll go around the room first. Craig, I'll come to you. Initial thoughts to the news that Thomas Frank is going to be leaving Brentford?
We've all been waiting for the inevitable. However many transfer windows there have been, I know he's not a player, but however many windows there have been is the number of rumours that he is going to be leaving Brentford. And it was going to happen eventually. We, like Dan said recently, we're so good at replacing players. This is just a new challenge for the backroom. Well, for the backroom, Matthew Benham, Phil Giles, as you said already. It could be a new exciting era for the football club. Eventually people will move on, and sometimes you need a change to make that next step. We just need to bring in the right appointment.
Callum, what do you reckon? You still think he's not going to go?
I still don't. Listen, he hasn't signed the contract yet, so until he signed the contract, we've seen this before where players in football decide that actually it's not right. But no, I'm disappointed. I feel like I said this the other week. I feel that for him as an individual, I feel like he should go to an established club where there's no aggro going on at this moment in time, i.e. the chairman is not particularly liked by any of the fans whatsoever. I was saying the other day, there's stickers around. I see them in my local town, Levy out. It's like, come on, like, why? I wouldn't want to be joining a club lot. I wouldn't like to be joining a club who's just sat their manager after winning a European trophy as well. And the way I think he was sacked as well, doesn't sit right. So, but if he does go, brave move. Sounds like he's taking half his backroom team as well if it does go through. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But I expected more. I expected more from Thomas if it does happen.
We'll get into the kind of instability at Spurs in terms of how we think he'll do there a little bit later on. But Dan, initial thoughts as well?
Like I said, it's obviously very sad. I can see why, from his perspective, that he does want to move. I think if one of the very top teams in this country changed their manager, if you're talking about City or Liverpool, I don't think they'd be looking his way. I think they'd go to another proven manager who's won it all elsewhere. So in terms of a possible move that he could get, which could elevate him to the next level, that's the type of job he needs to take. And it'll be really challenging for him. I'm not sure, whether it will be a success or not at this stage, but I think that, he's earned the right to have a go. And if he does succeed there, given the fact they're in the Champions League, given the fact they do have resources that should enable them to be higher up in the table than us, then he's deserved that chance. But I don't think there'll be any or many at all bad blood between him and Brentford fans after what he's done for us. I think he's fully deserved the opportunity to try and challenge himself, try and take his career to the next level. And obviously we'll never forget all his achievements and what he did with us.
Do we think, and I went on a Spurs podcast yesterday and I kind of said, kind of contrary to what you just said, Dan, in terms of maybe holding out for not a bigger club, because obviously Spurs are a big six club anyway, but for a club maybe that doesn't have that kind of instability that Callum mentioned. I do feel like that, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have gone for it, but you said sort of Liverpool would be looking for someone that's more established. You say that, but they did end up going for Arne Slot, who I know did things in the Dutch league, but I'm not sure the amount of cups that he won. Did he win the league or did he win the Dutch Cup with?
I think he won the league. I think he came with title wins under his belt. I think he's played in the highest European competitions, etc. So I think just with Thomas Frank, he needs to take himself to that next level, get some experience of doing things like that, and obviously even taking a club that are one of the top 5 or 6 best teams in its own league. I think he needs to get that experience if he wants to reach a real top, and you can't blame him for wanting to do that. He's not a Brentford fan at the end of the day, but we're still part of his journey. I'm sure the way he is, he'll still be so respectful when it comes to playing against Brentford next season. And he's given us so much, so we can't really sit here and complain about the decisions he's chosen to make.
To play devil's advocate, do you remember that match of the day interview that he did on the penultimate day of the season against Fulham? And that the reporter was kind of asking him, "Are you happy here?" Was anyone kind of thinking about that when the news broke at all? No,
he is happy. He is happy at Brentford just because he's another offer's come on the table. It's a chance to challenge himself. I don't not believe him that he wasn't happy. I don't necessarily think he was even, really pushing for a move. We've seen it a lot with players in previous years. They will actively do interviews to, try and hint at a move and push for a move. We've not seen any of that from Thomas Frank. But if a bigger club comes calling with more resources, obviously a brilliant training ground, the best stadium probably in the country, which is also something to think about from his perspective. I don't think we can blame him if they're approaching him and saying, would you be interested? I don't think that means he wasn't happy at Brentford as such.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I was just trying to play devil's advocate there, just to kind of elicit a Callum response, but it didn't actually work.
I think he is happy. I think he is happy at Brentford. I think I went to the Player of the Season awards, and he spoke very highly of the club and Matthew Benham, who was also in attendance that evening. So I don't think there's any kind of anything as such. Maybe the thing that maybe triggered him ever so slightly was in the last game of the season when half the crowd, or buggered off at home to Fulham. But do you blame him in such fashion when we lost? His face did say it all with how many people were in attendance to see the speech and to see the players walk round at the end of the game. But I don't think, to be honest with you, there is any issues. He's had good backing from Matthew and co. I don't think anyone at the club could have done any more to support him and his family. For him, he doesn't really need to kind of do much. He probably doesn't really even need to move house, to be honest. He can keep within London. It's a win-win for him. But I just feel that, and I will touch upon it again, for him, it has to be the right move. Of course, this could work out very well to him, and he could then jump onto bigger, better things after Tottenham if this is where he ends up. But you've seen before, I said this in the last episode, you look at Graham Potter, how sour things got for Graham Potter very, very quickly at Chelsea. And for a man like Thomas Frank, who's very down to earth, incredibly fan-driven, is close to many fans at this football club, he needs to make sure it's right. And I just don't think it's right, Tottenham Hotspur. I really don't. But listen, he knows best. And I will say, if he does go, I still don't think he will. And I can't wait to prove Fabrizio wrong. But I just hope it's right. I hope it's right for him. And I wish him well. I wish him well. If he was to go, I wish him very, very well. And what he's done for this football club. But yeah.
Craig, it's gonna become very real when we eventually, and I hope we get like a, I know those videos sometimes don't go down too well with like the Trent Alexander-Arnold one and the Mason Mount one, but you would think with some of the stuff that he said in the past about having the best kind of job in world football and that kind of connection that he had with the fans, getting us promoted to the Premier League for the first time ever, some of the results that we've had since we've been in the Prem, when we get that announcement, it's going to be like lump in your throat kind of territory. But I honestly, when the news broke and when I think Cam released like a Twitter compilation, did anyone see that? I'm sure you guys would have seen it, of him, like a timeline of his time throughout Brentford. I was honestly fighting back the tears. It was so emotional watching that, just because he kind of, Craig, just encapsulates what Brentford is in a way. It's like a family club, and he was the perfect person to kind of portray that on the pitch, if that makes sense.
But yeah, my thinking behind it is like, has he maybe got himself too comfortable in a role where now he doesn't feel like it is a challenge to what he's doing, and he wants to be able to go to a bigger club, which Tottenham is, and he wants to challenge himself. Like he says, he's in the best job in football, best job in the country, and things like that. And at no point, maybe bar the first 10 games in his reign, was his job under question. Even when we went on that awful spell last season, there was no real question as, is he the man for the job? We all backed him. We all knew that the results would come in the end. And throughout his tenure, there has been no doubt that he is gonna have the backing of the board and keep his job. He got comfortable, and he said that in interviews all the time. And maybe he's a little complacent in what he was doing and wanted to go and challenge himself. But I mean, I'll argue to the case that if they hadn't won the Europa League, there's no way that he would be going to Spurs. Like, the Champions League football will be a huge thing for him as well. In the same way it is for players, it is for coaches. If they hadn't won the Europa League, there's no way he goes there. And it is a challenge for him. And, like Callum says, we all saw what happened with Graham Potter and whatnot. I hope it doesn't go that way for him. I have a lot of
identical. It's absolutely identical. The pressure's on him this season. They're going to be back in the Champions League for the first time in a while. His cup record, although he did make a cup semi-final, he never really rated, I don't think, cup competitions at Brentford.
I do think the Carabao Cup is slightly different to the Champions League.
No. But I'm going to say, Tottenham fans are going to be expecting a lot, aren't they? Realistically, I'm not saying Champions League, no. But I'm saying outside of that, they're going to be expecting, after last year, them to kick on, them to do well in cup competitions outside of the Champions League. And personally, other than that cup run we had in COVID, all right, we made the quarterfinals last year, but they made a silly amount of changes. And, I just, Tottenham fans are going to be on him straight away. And I remember, do you remember when we played Chelsea a few years ago? He came out and said a few controversial things about the supporters that turned on him that day. They booed the performance when we were down to Chelsea. Yeah. Now, our fan base, I mean, a lot of them stick with the manager, but I don't think a club like Tottenham fans are going to take very well to the manager coming out and having a go at the supporters in such fashion that he did on that day. But I just really hope that he has, if he goes, he has a good season next year. He is supported by Levy, and he does a good job. Otherwise, come back to us on a free. We make a 10 million little profit. There you go, job done. There you go. It's written in the stars.
Make Callum interim manager for a little while.
I would.
Wait until Thomas Frank gets sacked and then bring him back.
Dan, do you think Callum mentioned at the top the start that he had at Brentford, losing 8 out of his first 10 games? Is that a concern for him at Spurs?
Yes, I mean, one of his first games will be the Super Cup against PSG. So that's a back five and a low block if I've ever seen one. Because we know how Thomas Frank.
That's keeping it. That's keeping it to single digits. That is that game.
Yeah. So it will, of course, be very difficult. The expectations are completely different, but he's probably grown as a manager himself since that first stint at Brentford. He was a relative unknown apart from some work that he did in Denmark prior to taking over at Brentford. So you'd like to think he's gained experience during that time. He knows about the Premier League. He's managed in the Premier League before now. You know, I'm fairly confident he can probably organise that team pretty well and at least, get some decent results against the teams that Tottenham are expected to beat. So, of course, if he starts with a similar record, he'll be under pressure straight away. You've only got to look at Nuno a few years ago when he went in at Tottenham. And obviously he got sacked pretty early on. So that's the risk he chooses to take. I'm sure he's very much aware of it. But if you're trying to get to the top of the game, you've got to take these risks and you've got to, show how good of a manager you are in not just one environment, but you've got to go somewhere else where the pressure's on and prove yourself all over again.
Just before we move on to kind of Spurs in a bit more detail and how we think he'll get on, favourite memories of Thomas Frank? I think the obvious one for all of us is the playoff final. But for me, some of the results we picked up in the Prem, Man City has to be up there. I think that game and as well, that kind of showed a lot of Spurs fans are kind of doubting maybe his acumen in terms of what he's won. But that game, I think, and what Pep Guardiola said about him in particular, I think people should listen to that and kind of be optimistic about that. And the fact that we've beaten every Premier League team that we've played under Thomas Frank, I think is an achievement. But favourite other memories? Any other ones that we can think of?
Obviously, the first one as well against Arsenal, the first Premier League win, and just how he adapted, I think, for our style from, being in the Championship to being in the Premier League, how he was able to do that and how we ended up surviving so comfortably. And I think since then, you've seen all these other teams come up, and I think that just only goes to show how good, even more so, of a job that Thomas Frank did by adapting our style. And then again, last season, adapting it again to try and be more on the front foot again. And I think he's left the club in a really, really good place.
Bournemouth
Yeah.
at home in the playoffs.
Yeah, that was good. Geeing up the fans before the game.
Yeah.
To be honest, I can't really pinpoint any kind of game as such that I would say Thomas Frank has really stood out. I think all of it has been incredible watching Thomas Frank and how he's changed this football club as a whole. But I feel like as a man and what he was, we've had some great managers who have been close with the fans. And I'll say this again, he has been an incredible person to know off the pitch. Whenever I've met him, Middlesbrough away, I've said this many, many times, but the fact he came over to supporters, shook all the fans' hands that day, had photos. It was our first away win that season, I think it was, or second, something silly like that in the Championship. And he had that thing with the supporters, and with Woody as well. He had that special bond. But for me, it's got to be playoff final, but isn't it really? But everything Thomas Frank has done for this football club, it will certainly be remembered. And as I said, he hasn't gone yet, but yeah, everything.
We'll have to cast our minds back to Hull away within the first 10 games.
Videos have come out recently, haven't they, of that?
There's still videos floating around of Frank out.
In terms of Frank at Spurs, first test of Champions League football playing Wednesday, Sunday. Do you think he has what it takes, Dan? How much of it hinges on the summer? How much of it hinges on the backing of Daniel Levy? That is where Ange fell down this season. I don't think he had a squad to compete on both fronts. Obviously, the injuries were bad. We've had an experience of kind of unprecedented injury crisis as well the season before last. Has Thomas Frank shown that he can do it, do you think?
I think he can, but when obviously thinking about where Spurs are, whoever's in charge, they're not going to win the Champions League. They're not going to win the Premier League. So I think, relative to their, ability and how good they are currently, I think he can do a good job. And that would probably be, getting out of the big group stage in the Champions League, which isn't too hard to do because you just got to avoid coming in the bottom 8. And then, challenging for the top 5 in the Premier League. And I think if he does that, that's a good season for Tottenham. And I don't think that's out of his reach at all. There's players there who, he must know of. Obviously, he's tried to sign Brennan Johnson in the past. He's tried to sign Archie Gray in the past. If he does manage to get Brian with him as well, there's certainly players who he knows about and, will be able to work with. And with the likes of Archie Gray as well as young players, I think he will do a really good job in terms of developing them. But yeah, I wouldn't expect anything extra special. I wouldn't expect them to be challenging for the title or to win the Champions League, but I think he can certainly do a good job in stabilizing them and just getting them more consistent in the Premier League than they were last season.
Do you
I think
think
he's just go and sign Neil Maupay if he goes to him and Maddison in the same team would be comical, wouldn't it? But
I
do
said,
you think go on,
I
Greg.
was going to say, I don't think it was the quiz, but it might have been the episode before that's post Wolves. We were talking about the rumours of Brian Mbeumo going to Man United and how that looked like it had been signed and sealed. And I mentioned at that point that even then Spurs still worried me. And I'm even more I'm even more convinced now that he would go to Spurs over Manchester United if Thomas Frank was to put in a bid for him, because he might have been as Dan found a childhood fan of Manchester United, but should Thomas Frank go there, that is a huge pull for a player like Brian Mbeumo, who has worked with and knows that the coach can get the best out of him, to go to Tottenham and have the players around him like that he will. Let's not beat around the bush. They've got a lot of very good players in that Tottenham squad. They just wasn't really used to their fullest ability under Ange. And now that shout as to what I did kind of seems more like a reality. And yeah, early shout in the no Craig. There you go.
Do you think the job, and I've kind of said this on some other pods that I've been on recently, but do you think, and not to kind of heavily romanticize it at all, because we kind of sing Thomas Frank's praises all the time as Brentford fans, and like we've spoken about the kind of links when he's been linked to United in the past, Chelsea, and you kind of get that reaction from their fans to say that what is this? This is not a good appointment or whatever. But obviously we've been banging the Thomas Frank drum for ages. Not to heavily romanticize it, but could this be the start of a top career for Thomas Frank? Do we think, if he does a good job at Tottenham, would it feel like vindication for anyone? Because I feel like it would, at least for me. I feel like if he did a good job at Tottenham, and I want him to do a good job at Tottenham, and maybe got them sort of towards the top four, did well in the Champions League, I really hope it's the start of a really top career for a manager that started at Brentford. And I think that would be. I just think people underrate the job that he's done at Brentford. They kind of just think keeping us up in the Premier League comfortably for the last 5 seasons is just like a piece of piss.
He's already had a top career. He had the best job in football. He said that himself.
The only ones who really ever spoke about Thomas Frank and how well he'd ever done, I think, was the BBC. Match of the day. I'll give them credit where it's due. They, especially Get Lineker, would always say, and Shearer would always say how well of a job Thomas Frank has done at Brentford. And I think no question will lie. You look at the budget he had. He's done an incredible job at Brentford, and to where we've gone to where we are now, averaging 11th place, over our time in the Premier League, narrowly missing out on Europe on 2 occasions. It's an incredible job that he's done, and absolutely, I would love to see him do well at Tottenham or wherever that will be, and then kick on to something, as people would say about Brentford, a stepping stone. There you go. That's what I'd like to use Tottenham if he goes to Tottenham, a stepping stone, and then he can go off to something a bit better, which I think he should do. But we'll wait and see. But yeah, let's just hope he does well.
I think a lot of his early work at Tottenham, this is why he needs time, will be things behind the scenes, building that culture, building that togetherness, because that was one of his big strengths at Brentford. And obviously, absolutely everyone who's played for Brentford in the last few years will tell you that, it's one of the best dressing rooms they've been in. The club cares about you so much. The culture around the club is so good. They release videos at times of, I don't know, whether it's a player telling their story of how they got into football when they were younger and things like that. And that all comes from Thomas Frank. And, if you have that environment in the background, then that is perfectly set up to then get the best of the players on the pitch. And, he genuinely cares about all his players, but that's not going to be something that he can just build necessarily over one summer at Spurs. So they've got to be a bit patient with him. They've got to give him a bit of time, because if there is any criticism of his managerial ability, maybe it's sometimes changing things in game, or not making subs early enough. And you could imagine maybe Spurs fans getting a bit frustrated with that. But I would just say to let him do the work behind the scenes, let him put everything in place, because then even if it doesn't work out, or they have a few years of stability, but they really want to push to the next level, then he will leave the club in a better place than what he joined it in.
Should we talk about some of the rumours linking our players? Obviously, we've already mentioned Brian and Bumo, that Spurs are potentially hijacking that deal. I'm not sure how much weight there is in these rumours, but there was another one from Sam Thibodeau this morning, or yesterday, sorry, suggesting that he wants to bring Nathan Collins with him. I've got a quote retweet in the running order from BFC Kev to say, leaving is forgivable, taking Nathan Collins isn't. How do we feel about Thomas Frank potentially cherry picking our best players? To anyone?
We're a selling club. We're a selling club. Nathan Collins and Brian Boone are their different situations. Brian's got 1 year with an option of another. He is at he's at peak selling point. His value's at the highest right now. But if they want to come in and try and take Nathan Collins, you've got a player with 5 years left on his contract. He's going to go for more than what Brian Mbeumo goes for, because you're going to have to pay out the rest of his contract. So £1 billion and you can have him.
Anyone else?
No, we're not a fan of letting several key players go in one summer. That's perfectly understandable. We're not going to want the whole core of our team to go. So I don't think Nathan Collins will go. I think Spurs' interest might be contingent on Romero leaving as well from their side. But yeah, like Craig said, there's no reason for us to sell him. He's got so long left on his contract. He's looking forward to working with Kelleher and Vandenberg, who's got a relationship with now. And yeah, from a class perspective, I think Thomas Frank knows this as well. We will sell at the right price, but we're also sensible. We won't be bullied into sales. And given that he's got such a long length on his contract, then it would be a lot, like an awful lot, for us to let him go, especially with all the other changes going on this summer.
Any animosity towards that, Callum? What do you reckon?
I wouldn't have anything if Collins decided that he wanted to jump ship. I'm not surprised one bit that there is rumours. It's going to come with anything with a possible manager leaving. I would say Collins is a good shout for Tottenham. I think he would fit in very, very well with the style of football that Thomas Frank likes to play. So yeah, I can definitely see him going, and I can see them paying a lot of money, maybe including a little player, maybe Archie Gray, and come our way a year later than planned. Then yeah, feel free, mate, feel free. But yeah, I can see him going. I can't see Mbeumo going there, just because I think they've got too many options in those spaces already. But yeah, he's going to go. He's going to go, and that might be the first. Or maybe Sade as well. Maybe there you go. It's maybe Sade. But
Frank Onyeka to Spurs.
Listen, Onyeka to have a quality season next year, so none of that, Craig.
Not with us though. He ain't.
It's kind of interesting to see the rumours though, in terms of what players that he rates highly enough to want him to come with him to Spurs. Because I would have thought, Mikkel Damsgaard's had a fantastic season, Johan Wissa as well. Some of the younger players that we've got in the kind of B team, whether he'd kind of be worried about them going on as well. But to see Nathan Collins come in, it wasn't like I was surprised that he was the name, despite how good he's been this season. I thought it might have been someone else. I
think it's because of Romero and the fact there might be a gap in Spurs' team that opens up for a centre back. That's why I said Nathan Collins. But the risk is, if anyone has a good season for Brentford next season and Thomas Frank knows him, then Thomas Frank, you can imagine him going to the Spurs board and say, "Oh yeah, I'd quite like us to have a look at him."
Yeah, it's difficult. Should we talk about the succession plan? Lyle Thomas tweeted this morning that an agreement between Brentford and Tottenham for Thomas Frank has not been reached yet. Callum, there you go. Still not happened.
He's staying, but Nathan Collins is going.
Talks are expected to continue this morning over conversation with several backroom staff under discussion, including Justin Cochrane. In terms of the backroom staff that could be leaving, we saw another tweet this morning to suggest it's Klaus Norgard, Kevin O'Connor, and Justin Cochrane. There's been a lot of noise around Cochrane in particular, Kevin O'Connor too. Are we worried about these kind of links to the backroom staff? The more I hear about Cochrane and the more I read up on it, that seems like a really good appointment in my book. Just because he'd be following in the footsteps of Thomas Frank, knows the players, knows the club, knows the recruitment structure, etc. How do we feel about that? Anyone?
I'm not fussed about the other two. I think O'Connor. I think it'd be great for him to go and do, build his record of, going on to a club like Tottenham. But Justin, I mean, I was thinking yesterday. It makes me think maybe we may have had some knowledge of Spurs being interested a few months ago, because obviously they went off to do some work with the England team. I don't know if he went out. I don't know if he's with them at the moment though, which is a little quiet on that. I haven't seen him. Be interested to see if he is there tonight, since England have got a game. But maybe that was the reason why we let him go. But I think, yeah, he's someone who knows the club, and I think he's got such a value to him, and with what he's done in football. Of course, the other two, especially O'Connor. But I would be gutted most if we let Justin go, personally, especially as it's now dropped to 4-7. Not that I'm a betting man, but it's, we've seen how well it works with Thomas Frank. He was brought in as a second assistant manager, got to know how the club operates on and off the pitch, and then straight into the main job. That's what maybe we were hoping with Justin. Who knows? But that would be a big loss. Big loss.
I'd be very sad if Kevin O'Connor left, just because of who he is and the fact he's a Brentford man, and he's a Brentford fan, and he's people like that are important to have around the scenes. Obviously, we've got Peter Gillam behind the scenes as well, but having someone like Kevin O'Connor, who's only ever known Brentford and has been there for so long, if we were to get a new manager in, having someone like Kevin O'Connor along his side, I don't think you can underestimate that, given all of his experience being at Brentford for so long. And I do wonder if Kevin O'Connor would want to leave, based on his ties to Brentford. Thomas Frank has ties to Brentford, but not like Kevin O'Connor. He's always been a one club man. So it'd be very interesting to see if Kevin O'Connor did go. I hope he doesn't. And yeah, Cochrane, I agree. I think we don't need to change too much in terms of the culture and how the squad is. We want to add to the squad this summer, but we're not looking for someone to come in and completely overhaul things. So I think someone who's familiar with how everything's run and is able to progress us, and if he has his own tactical ideas and wants to get into management, I would definitely like to see it. Obviously, we want to see him still put his own stamp on things, but yeah, we saw it with Thomas Frank. If we can do that again, with someone like him, who is clearly very qualified and has top level coaching experience for some bigger clubs and also England now, it is something I would like to see. Especially when you're looking at the other options, I don't see why we shouldn't try and give him a go, and maybe that might deter him from going to Spurs as a backroom member.
Do we any other names tickle your fancy, Craig? Kieran McKenna's been linked, Francesco Farioli. I'm not even going to try and butcher his first name, but Knutson from Bodo Glimt obviously got got knocked out by Spurs in the Europa League semi-final, but it's done an incredible job in Norway. Any other of those names tickle your fancy?
Well, I like looking through the odds of different managers and things like that. And the thing that's making me chuckle at the moment is, according to Paddy Power, Ange Postecoglou's next permanent managerial job, the favourite for that is us. So that's straight swap with Ange. But yeah, when you look at the odds, you obviously got Justin Cochrane as a favourite, but there's lots of rumours now of him going to Spurs, as we've just said. I don't want to be rude, but I feel like Kieran McKenna is not a very inspiring replacement. Like that to me just doesn't scream the next step. I understand that we give coaches the opportunity, like we did with Thomas Frank, and we did with let's not ignore the fact that Mark Warburton was never a manager, had never managed a club before he managed us. Uwe Rosler was very, very new to management when we gave him I know we're going back to League One Championship days, but yeah, what scares me is when you look at the odds and you see names like Steve Cooper. Nope, don't want that one.
They have to be there though. honestly, I'm saying, look, Ranieri's turned down the Italy job today, so there you go. He's Brentford banned as we speak. He'll be signing later today.
I have seen names on social media as well, like Danny Roll, Sheffield Wednesday, De Zerbi, even our Iraola's in the mix somehow. There are
You haven't
names.
mentioned the special one yet. You haven't mentioned Mourinho.
Didn't Mourinho come out and say that if there is a lower league Premier League club not in Europe looking for a manager, to give him a shout?
It's one way to ruin the culture, isn't it?
I'd love it. Or just bring back the old, or bring back Jurgen Klopp.
Bring Lee Carsley back.
Jurgen Klopp, though, just saying. I mean, God, he did come down to the training ground many years ago, didn't he? When we were heavily linked. So it's, and he's always said he's a fan of how Brentford work. Who knows? Who knows?
I think with McKenna, obviously, Craig reacted to it in a way a lot of Brentford fans have kind of reacted to it, and it does feel a bit underwhelming. But I feel like that's what a lot of Spurs fans are probably saying about Thomas Frank, just because Thomas Frank's never been at the level of Spurs. Kieran McKenna's never managed at the level we're at now. But I think if you look at his work, taking a team from League One to the Premier League in just 2 seasons is extremely
phenomenal.
Impressive.
That is phenomenal. That's so impressive.
That's like us going up when we got the playoffs in our first Championship season, if we went straight up that season. And I don't think anyone could have, kept Ipswich up after rising so quickly. They ultimately went up too quickly, I think. And, maybe you could argue they could have given it a slightly better fight. But the fact he did that in 2 seasons, he's obviously got something about him. He's obviously a good tactician, and I think give him a better side, and I think he would be able to stay up with Brentford and hopefully thrive with Brentford. So I wouldn't be opposed to him coming in. I feel like English managers as well always seem a little bit less exciting just because he's called Kieran McKenna.
Thomas Frank's hardly the most continental name out there as well, isn't he?
That's very true. Is it what I've been seeing a lot of, and I haven't enjoyed seeing a lot of, is the kind of doom and gloom on Twitter specifically. I know Twitter's a bit of a toxic platform these days, but I found there's a lot of people in panic stations, and I wanted to, on this pod in particular, kind of quell that a little bit. I just feel like this is something that the club will have been coming for a very long time. The amount of media attention there's been, and like we say, that it does go under the radar, the job that Thomas Frank has done, but it won't go under the radar for a lot of these top clubs. They would have been seeing the work that he's done, and this is why he's gone to Spurs. But as one of the best run clubs in the country, we have to think that Matthew Benham will have been thinking about this for a very long time, and there will be a short list of potential replacements for him. So like that doom and gloom, do we feel like it's a bit over the top? I feel people are saying that we're going to be in real trouble next season. I'm just looking at it like we've shown from the evidence that we've shown that we're too smart for that to happen.
Well, you've got to look at clubs like Brighton and like Bournemouth. Brighton had Graham Potter. Graham Potter then moved on to Chelsea, and it didn't work out for him. But you have to look at how they succeeded under De Zerbi, and now how they're succeeding under the guy's name I can't remember.
Herzler.
Then you've got to look at Bournemouth. Bournemouth have pushed on over the last couple of years as well. They went from there's going to be a huge gap. They went from Eddie Howe to Scott Parker, and now they've had Iraola, and they've moved on to bigger things, and they've pushed for European football this season as well. Change does not necessarily mean a bad thing.
Yeah,
we could bring someone in that then takes us to the next step, and yeah, change is scary, and it was scary when we moved from Warburton to Thomas Frank, or Dean Smith to Warburton to Dean Smith to Thomas Frank. It was always scary, and it was tough when Thomas Frank took over to begin with. Now, the stakes are a lot higher. That's the biggest difference. The stakes are a lot higher because we're talking about risking Premier League football by taking a risk in bringing in I'm going to use the word underproven, but obviously Kieran McKenna has done his stuff as well. Justin Cochrane has not managed the team. He's been a coach. He's not been a head coach. He's not been a manager. So we whether we bring someone in who is underexperienced or doesn't have the experience of. I'm saying this like Thomas Frank had managed fucking Barcelona before he'd been to us, but was at Bromby. So it's a risk, but there is more on the line now than there was when Thomas Frank took over.
Callum, are you panicking about next season? Are you panicking about the appointment?
Not really, to be honest with you. I have full belief in Matthew Benham. I guess the only thing I'm a little bit worried about is I think the Premier League this season coming up is going to be a lot stronger than what it was last season. You know, you looked at the teams that came up, you could have said most likely, you know, the ones that were going to come up were probably going to go down. That basically happened. But I can see the teams who have come up, they've got a bit of money behind them now. Leeds, Sunderland, got good calibre of players there already, and I'm sure they'll strengthen. So a little worried in that respect, but no, I have full belief in the recruitment, and I think we're going to do very well next season, and bring in a manager who is going to attract a lot of good players to the club and continue in exactly the same form as what we've had under Thomas Frank.
Do we think we'll finish above Spurs next season?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that they need a big summer. If they don't bring in a few players, they'll struggle to deal with Champions League football and Premier League football. Like, again, with all due respect to these teams, it's different playing against Bodo Glimt as it is playing against Barcelona. Saying that, I would love to play Bodo Glimt, so Conference League football would still be ideal for us.
Talking of Bodo Glimt, I do think Knutson would be a good appointment. I think he's probably the exciting appointment because I think he's won 4 titles out in Norway for a team who hadn't ever won the Norwegian title before he got into that job. And obviously being a European semi-finalist again with an unfancy team who probably weren't expected to go that far, that is a really impressive CV for the level. Of course, it's very different playing in Norway than it is playing in England, but I think he would be a very exciting appointment as well. But yeah, ultimately, we've got time. We've got time this summer. I think we've got money to spend, particularly when Brian leaves. Of course, it's a risk. Anything is a risk because we've not been in this situation before. But, you know, with a full pre-season for whoever takes over, I don't see a reason why we can't be still pushing and staying on that trajectory we're on.
Excited for Spurs against Brentford on the first day of the season next season?
That's inevitable.
That is inevitable. Should we leave it there, boys? Is there anything else that we wanted to mention? I feel like that was a good therapy session. If there's anything else,
just obviously for Brentford fans to keep in mind that change is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not.
He hasn't gone yet.
He's not gone yet, but change isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No.
You know, where Matthew Benham is looking at getting money in and selling some of his shares. We're not panicking about that, and that's right at the top level. So change is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, let's see what happens. I don't think we're in trouble. Could be an exciting time.
Just to go on, Callum. You go first.
No, I agree. I think it's going to be quite an interesting summer. You know, we've already got one person through the door, plenty of players linked already, so I'm excited to see what happens there. Buemo's going to stay as well, so there you go. No one needs to worry about that. And there you go. We're going to finish above Tottenham next season, so there you go. Job done.
Dan?
Yeah, like I said, it's a long summer. We've got money to spend. I think it could go either way, but I'm hopeful that we'll continue doing as well as we're doing. I think, you know, it is exciting if you look at it from a different perspective. So, you know, it's very much something that, you know, going into a new era, I'm already looking forward to the start of the season in anticipation and hopefully not being too stressed out come Christmas time or 2026.
As long as we win an away game before 2026, I'll be all right.
Just to round off the pod, Sam Tabuto has just tweeted, understand Frank ideally wants Justin Cochrane, Klaus Norgard, Keith Andrews and Manu Sotelo, who I believe is the goalkeeping coach, to join him at Tottenham. He also wants Brentford's fitness coach, Tom Perryman, who's been at the club since 2014. So I'd presume it's him Frank is after. He's going to take Peter Gillen with him at this point. We planned this joke from the top of the show.
Was O'Connor on that list?
Connor wasn't on the list. And Sam has also just recently tweeted, understand there's a fair bit of frustration about the reports regarding how many staff Frank wants to take with him to Tottenham. But I'd also say this is quite natural for a new manager to do Plus, any new Brentford manager would probably look to bring in his own people as well.
There you go. This is going to be the scupper. This is what's going to not get the deal over the line. I'm telling you now.
You heard it here
I
first.
can't wait to
It's not
prove all
confirmed
you
yet.
lot wrong. That's what I'm saying.
I think we'll round it off there. The Ealing Road podcast will definitely be back in the coming weeks regarding appointments, transfers, anything like that. Obviously, as I mentioned at the top, we were looking forward to a bit of a break, but I think with all this news, it's just exciting. So we're going to be back to chat about everything that unfolds over the next few weeks. Remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts. I bet everyone has a lot of them. So let us know in the comment section. As always, we'll do our best to reply to as many as we can. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Gents, lovely to see you so soon again.
Up the managerless bees.
Up the managerless bees.